Otto Lehto. Otto, welcome in Freiburg, the city of ordoliberalism. You are here as a guest scientist. We are very happy to have you here. And of course, the first question is about Freiburg ordoliberalism. So ordoliberalism has had a place in Freiburg and the University of Freiburg, then moved on in its development to Chicago, for example. And in Germany in particular, it resulted in the social market policy, social market economy in Germany after the Second World War. So it has some importance for the history of economic science, but also the life in Germany. And my first question to you is whether you can give us a bit an overview where it came from. What was it?
Yes, and first of all, just say I'm so happy to be here because Freiburg indeed is one of those centers of liberal learning and thinking, and especially liberal learning and thinking that is tied up with multiple disciplines of the social sciences. So the original faculty here, where the original Ordo ideas were developed, was the Department of Law and Economics. And so legal studies and philosophy and economic science were deeply interconnected. And this is also what interests me as a philosopher and also as a political economist, is this connection between the law and political science and even morality. And all these things were there at the beginning, around the 20s and 30s, where the original Ordo thinkers here lived. Now, I will correct one thing, and then I will tell you the story. And I will get into the story and why it matters for me personally, and also I think for basic income research. So, ordoliberalism was a specifically German phenomenon, which in many ways stayed in Germany. What left Germany were certain thinkers who formed in 1947 together with thinkers from Austria, from Chicago, who had already developed their own unique traditions of liberalism. For example, in Austria, going back to the 19th century, so Karl Menger, for example, lived already at the time of Nietzsche. You have these different traditions growing up. Ordo here in Freiburg, which actually got its name only in the 40s when the journal Ordo was established. And this journal grew out of the research here done in Freiburg by Walter Eucken, who was the main economist, one of whose books is actually here, and we have plenty more here. We have the Walter Eucken Institute nearby as well. Eucken, who was an economist and also an opponent of the Nazis, and he got into a lot of trouble for that, but also after the war obviously was lauded justifiably as an intellectual hero of the academia. At the same time, you have Franz Böhm, and together Eucken and Böhm were the two main thinkers of ordoliberalism here. Böhm was a lawyer, so that's why they brought these capacities together. And so what their main ideas were related to revitalizing understanding of the market economy. And they saw their work as being partially a continuation and, on the other hand, a partial rejection of what they called laissez-faire liberalism, which they saw as an excessive focus on the self-regulating capacities of markets. And for Eucken, Böhm and their followers in Germany, they focused on the role of institutions and legal frameworks, what they call Ordnung, or Ordnungspolitik, hence the name Ordo, for the functioning of a market society, including the formal rules of social interaction, the legal rules, the political institutions, but also, especially later on with people like Wilhelm Röpke, the importance of morality and of the cultural importance for a well-functioning market society. Okay, so all this is happening in Germany, suppressed under Nazis. Then after the war, under West German emergence, you have really the first time when these ideas are put into practice, and this partially has been credited with the German Wirtschaftswunder, as it is often called, the economic miracle under Ludwig Erhard and Konrad Adenauer, and so on. And so this is a very German tradition, and in fact if you go to Chicago, as you mentioned, where they certainly have many ideas which are partially similar to the Ordo ideas, and they have international organizations like the Mont Pelerin Society, founded in 1947, in which brings together these different traditions. But if you go to Chicago, for example, many people there have not read Eucken or Böhm because they are such different traditions. But the crucial nexus here is really the emergence of what is sometimes called the neoliberal thought collective, as some historians have called it, which really starts in the 1930s already with some international organizations like the Walter Lippmann Colloquium, I think in Paris in 1936, which brings together people like from Austria, Hayek, and from Germany, people like the ones I mentioned, Eucken and others. And then after the war in 1947, on the slopes of Mont Pelerin in Switzerland, you have this birth of the International Society for Liberalism, market liberalism coming together, which represents these different traditions, which are not always in alignment perfectly, so there's lots of differences of opinion. And for example, the Ordo approach, which has a heavy focus on these of this strong state which protects the competitive order, was in conflict with some of the ideas of, for example, Ludwig von Mises from Austria, who was more a believer in the self-regulating power of markets. But they all shared an understanding that the Western civilization at that point was at crossroads because of the double threat of National Socialism and fascist regimes, and on the other hand, the popularity of communism and socialism. And they saw, like Hayek in his famous book Road to Serfdom from Austria, not only the threat of these totalitarian ideologies, but also the tendency of the war economies of the West under Churchill and others, and in the United States under Roosevelt, to expand the state to the point where it started to make it harder for the market society to function. And so they saw their mission, even if they had many different ideas of, for example, how much the state should provide social security to people, which will be important as we talk about basic income, right? And how much the state should fight against monopolies. But nonetheless, regardless of their differences, they saw that there needs to be a new theoretical focus on bringing together a new kind of liberalism, which is capable of responding to the challenges of unemployment, for example, macroeconomic stabilization, also the demands for workers' rights and so on, without leaving the door open to socialism, as they saw as the biggest danger. And so this is a very long-winded answer to the question of Freiburg and its relationship, but I think it's important because the Freiburg tradition, even though it is a very German tradition, shares many connections to these broader global currents. And indeed, the German economic example is justifiably lauded as, I think, one of the great success stories of the West. And without it, who knows how Germany would have looked. We might not have the European Union that we have today. We might not have the type of economic success that we have today. And so that has really shaped German future, but also economic future in many ways.
First, I think it's interesting where it comes from. And you mentioned the threat of socialism, the threat of totalitarian systems, whether it is fascism or it is communism. That was triggering those people, Hayek and others. And first it was, where has been the first meeting? That was in Switzerland, this Mount
Pelerin.
Yeah,
okay. So
it comes from, so this is the first step. That was the first gathering of those.
Hayek was the organizer of that first meeting, and if you look at who was there at that first meeting, it's a really who's who of the liberal world. At the first meeting, I think in April of '47, at a hotel in near the Mount Pelerin in Switzerland, you have Walter Eucken, Wilhelm Röpke from German Ordo school. I think Franz Böhm was there as well. Then you have from Austria, you have Ludwig von Mises, you have Friedrich Hayek. From Chicago, you have Milton Friedman, you have George Stigler. And this was the first time when all these people met. Some of them had met before, but like this is the first time when they all meet together, and this society still then becomes partially an informal hub of discussion and debate, lots of very active debates, especially in the early years, and in fact many acrimonious disputes about issues like this: social security, progressive taxation. And so, for example, some thinkers then leave because they have disagreements with others and so on. You know, this is the sort of normal things you see. But yeah, as after '47, then you have the international dimension, which some historians like Quinn Slobodian have called this sort of the Geneva connection, because ultimately it then leads to the international organizations around Switzerland. But really the Mont Pelerin meeting of '47 is where this begins. But it doesn't call itself Ordo meeting, it's a liberal meeting, and then you can call it neoliberal, you can call it what you want, but they saw themselves as really carriers of the torch of Adam Smith, but really focused on answering to the demands of the 20th century, the new demands of the different society, different capacities for the state, and different challenges.
Well, that's clear. That's not ordoliberalism, but it came from liberalism.
Yes.
And what a bit more precisely happened in Freiburg, direction ordoliberalism, and what is the distinction to what went further on in the direction of neoliberalism?
Yes. So, as a philosopher, I like definitions, and I dislike bad definitions, and unfortunately neoliberalism is one of the worst definitions, because nobody really has a very good meaning of what it contains. But I think it's possible to say that under one definition, neoliberalism includes everything from what people like John Stuart Mill and Keynes and others were doing already, because they were trying to provide a new foundation for liberalism, which was more socially focused. So there's some discussion of this kind of new liberalism. They call it new liberalism, especially in Britain. But this is kind of different from what Milton Friedman were doing, and this is different from what Hayek was doing. This was more like trying to combine socialism with free market economics. This was like one type of neoliberalism. But then you have the neoliberalism of people like Hayek and Friedman, and I think this is, again, it's a loose collective of thinkers, and under some definition, the Ordo school is one branch of neoliberalism. Under another definition, you could say they're different, but there doesn't exist any agreed upon definition of what neoliberalism is, and most of the people who are considered neoliberal, like Friedman or whatever, they didn't call themselves neoliberals, at least most of the time. And so, but I think if we really think about the differences here, I think one of the crucial things is that the German Ordo tradition, the Freiburg tradition in particular. And okay, here I need to also add one thing. The German Ordo tradition really lasts almost a century. Well, yes, you could say a century. It started in the 20s and we are here in the 20s again, but different 20s. So here we are in the 20s again, and after 100 years, what can we say? What is ordoliberalism? Well, it's many different things. It goes through phases. The original Ordo school was here in Freiburg. It was here in the 20s, 30s, and a little bit after. But this was really a focus on the questions of the order, of the legal framework and the political framework, and how we can secure a framework for market society that does not allow for this kind of active interventionist state, which meddles with all aspects of the economy, but provides the foundational basic rules, the framework for social organization. Okay, and then with Ordo, what happens after the war, Ordo becomes political. You have people not only from Freiburg, but from Münster and Cologne, others, like Alfred Müller-Armag and Wilhelm Röpke, who are not from Freiburg, but they all have similar ideas, but they also diverge in some issues. And so already Ordo becomes a very rich and diverse tradition. And in some ways there's a change. So some historians like to distinguish between the early Freiburg school of Eucken and Böhm, and then the sort of post-war political Ordo under Erhard and Müller-Armag and Röpke, which becomes more closely associated with the politics of the CDU, and becomes also called under the new name of the social market economy. And there is a continuity from the Eucken-Böhm, but I think there's also kind of it becomes looser and it becomes part of establishment politics, in which case it becomes less theoretical and more practically oriented. Yeah. But in any case, throughout all these phases, I think there's a strong emphasis that it is not enough to simply let the markets go free, but in particular to provide for a strong state that has certain core functions that go beyond what many Austrian economists, for example, would allow, especially Mises, who was very critical of the Ordo school for this reason, because he saw them as being too much focused on a strong state. Although with Hayek, it's not so clear, because Hayek was a good friend of Walter Eucken and he respected Eucken a lot, and they had a very productive exchange of ideas. And in fact, Hayek, of course, spent almost 3 decades overall in Freiburg as a professor towards the end of his life. So in that sense, you could even say that Hayek was a member of the Ordo school, at least an honorary member, because he saw this as one of his main homes, even though he was originally from Vienna, like the Austrian school.
So you mentioned that the intention was to look that it can be liberal, but also social, right? From the beginning.
Yes.
But not so much that the state is doing everything, but to think clearly about 2 aspects. It has to be liberal, to enfold potential, power and talents and growing, and it has to be social, because it has to do with all the members of society and with justice and chances for everybody. So when I hear that, I think, okay, that is the definition of a universal unconditional basic income. It is much more liberal. You are more free to decide on where you contribute to society, what is your path of your life and your career. And it is much more social, because it gives the same basic floor for everybody, and everybody is safe and secure to lead his or her life. So that this is, for me, precisely what they wanted, but they didn't know about basic income at that time. So, yeah, but you have something to say about that.
Yes, I think the relationship between the possibility of basic income and the Ordo school is a very, very interesting academic question which has barely been touched. And in fact, there's a gaping hole for research in this area. And, you know, myself and some others are trying to maybe fill this gap. But it was not the Ordo school that came up with the idea of basic income or that proposed it.
Of course not. I know.
In fact, almost nobody in the Ordo tradition was supportive of the idea, even after the discussion on this became prominent in, for example, United States. Of course, most of this discussion really starts in the 60s and 70s, where, to be fair, most of the heavyweights of the Ordo school had already either died, like Eucken died in 1950. Röpke was still alive, but others had pretty much already gone. So at that point, there really wasn't. I'm just reading a paper by someone who argues that, in fact, Ordo school became much more of a political program and lost its vitality as an active research program, especially in today's society. So the most active and vibrant discussion around issues of social security, new forms of social security like basic income really took place within, on the one hand, Chicago under George Stigler and Milton Friedman, if we just limit ourselves to the liberal side of the equation, and in some parts of the Austrian school, in particular in Hayek's, for example, the Constitution of Liberty, where Hayek speaks about the guaranteed minimum income, which is not quite the same thing as UBI, but it's close to it. And some people argue that it can be used as a justification for UBI. But so you have this active tradition with Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman in 1962, with the Constitution of Liberty around the same time. And in the Ordo school, what do they do? What do they say about this? Well, first of all, they don't talk much about it, because this is a German tradition, German politics. They are mostly focused on this. So even if they are part of the international liberal organizations like Mont Pelerin, as a matter of fact, most of them had already even left Mont Pelerin at that point. And in the 60s and 70s, the Mont Pelerin Society became more and more Anglo-American. So these kind of conversations were more happening inside United States and other places. And so what was the relationship of the Ordo school to this? Well, they were very much kind of focused on building up on Bismarck, as they saw themselves as being Germans. So they saw themselves as being, some of them rejected social security altogether and they thought Bismarck went too far. But some of them really saw, if there is a role for social security as part of the soziale Marktwirtschaft, it should be something like guaranteed old age pension, unemployment insurance, sick leave benefits and healthcare. And they saw that this is enough. This is the proper framework. You provide social insurance, and this is the proper response to the state.
So, but interesting for me is, can it be that this line of the idea of more liberal politics, liberal and social, and which is conducted then in Freiburg, ordoliberalism, what we call from today neoliberalism, but what is liberalism, what is the whole Chicago school, and so on. In this frame, the idea first not of an unconditional basic income, but a different kind of social state, a different kind of social protection, which is quickly linked to something like income guarantee, a minimum income guarantee. What does not mean that people get the money, everybody, but if you come in trouble or if you are below a transfer line or something like that.
Yes.
So that those ideas who are fundamental in the history for what we now can understand and see as a real, sufficient, unconditional basic income. Could one say the roots are in this movement? Is that in the spirit, included in that spirit, even if, of course, they did not talk about an unconditional universal basic income, but it has prepared that, hasn't it?
And if liberalism is to survive, it has to be an active research program that responds to challenges of the day. And when they spoke about new liberalism in the 30s, it was new liberalism contextualized into the 30s. When we speak about liberalism today, or new liberalism today, or ordoliberalism, or new ordoliberalism, we must talk about ordoliberalism for this century, this decade, and what we are today. And yes, the foundations of the thinking provide ample ammunition for thinking about what would a basic income scheme mean from this point of view. It's not just that you have a market society and then on the side you have some insurance policies. Perhaps you also need to go to the foundations like Eucken did. Perhaps you need to go to the foundations of the constitutional order, the foundational rules of society. And perhaps you need to think about, as part of this framework of foundational rules, what if you could have rules that guarantee a platform for all individuals as free agents to have security that is truly responsive to all circumstances. The problem with these social insurance schemes, which the Ordo-liberals often supported, is that they were again a part of the zeitgeist, you could say. They were part of the post-war consensus, compromise between different parties and ideologies. They were set for a particular type of industrial society. Mm-hmm. And I don't think again, I never want to say if they live today they would say this, but active Ordo thinkers today must recognize that some of those structures, some of that order that existed as the compromise between the labor unions, trade associations, the sort of industrial society where people show up at work at 8 and they go home at so and so hour and they have a rather stable work life. You know, this is changing. And also, I do think that the empirical evidence of the capacity of these social insurance systems to provide sufficient protection and to be sufficiently adaptable to allow for this free market economy that Ordo liberals wanted to see is simply not working. So I think, yes, the tools of ammunition of the Ordo school, in their emphasis on the importance of having a general framework of rules, is a very, very good support for building a type of basic income model, or several different types of basic income models.
But that's very interesting for me. It comes more from the liberal side. It comes more from the idea of economy, and that social protection should not be a by side part from the government, but more inclusive, economy and social. And finally, I can tell you what is the social world that is economy. That's where people are doing things for each other, with each other. So this is a social field. And that's interesting for me also because, for example, in Germany, the idea of basic income was not popular, as long as it was more or less from the left side. And that sticks to social justice for the poor ones, for those below. And it's always linked to class struggling. So the rich has to pay that the poor are better. And that is like, you can imagine that as long as the poor are fighting against the rich win. It's not it's not a good idea. And it became more popular in Germany, in particular, not only, but by this entrepreneur Götz Werner, who is the donor of the Götz Werner chair here. Because his idea for a basic income does not come from social protection or something like that. It came precisely from his entrepreneurial experiences that he saw, wow, people first need an income, then they can contribute, then they can step in our company. And if it's not always linked to income, I urgently need an income and that's why I'm here. But when this is more or less outside, you are not paid for work. And he said, I quote, work cannot be paid in either case, because this is you cannot be paid, this is slavery, because you are a human being, I cannot buy you, and your work is your life. So what work is so much part of the human being, the individual effect in the world, what he is contributing, that cannot be paid and made to my property. But everybody needs an income. And that he saw people has to work in the company not because they urgently need that tiny little income, but because they are part of the cooperative group and team. And we have the same goal. And the goal is a customer. The goal is not the money in my pocket. That we deliver good things for people, for them. So this is precisely an idea of economy, what it is in real, so not profit-driven, but to make the best things for others and to understand that enterprises are places where people conduct and create and develop their biography, so their lives. It is a place for where you are living. In this connection, he came up with the idea of an unconditional universal basic income. And that made the most huge impact in the German population. First, because, of course, he's very recommended as an entrepreneur. But also because this is a free idea. It is not together with need. We have to help the poor. This was free. And in the center was the idea of human being. And that a human being is free. And your contribution to society in enterprises and in companies is free. It is not compulsion. It is what you are doing. It's your life. Say that because it's interesting for me that the idea emerged and came up more from that side.
Yeah, I think it's so wonderful to have entrepreneurs like Werner be at the forefront of this discussion. It's also the case in many other countries. So in Finland, for example, one of the biggest proponents of this idea is one of the richest bankers in the society, who saw slightly from a different point of view than Werner that it makes no sense to have this complex bureaucratic machinery that doesn't even provide the basic security for all people that it's supposed to do. Because he understands that whether it's business or welfare, having a complex administrative machinery and so much paperwork creates a lot of inefficiency and just reduces the dynamism and the capacity of people to have initiative, entrepreneurial capacity, freedom, these things which he and Werner and really anybody who's interested in a dynamic free society and entrepreneurial spirit will recognize is being stifled by the administrative state. The idea has sort of become this Kafkaesque monster. The idea that we have a system of providing for people, it shouldn't lead to this situation where you have these different classes of people. On the one hand, you have the antagonism, as you mentioned, of the rich versus the poor, which always leads to just class politics and everything else. At the same time, you have the class of politicians, you have the class of administrators, you have the class of welfare recipients, class of taxpayers, and it just becomes interest group based discussion. And really one of the biggest tragedies of the welfare state is that it has done so much good, and it has also smuggled in these old ideas of a rigid state, which are not needed to provide good help for people, whether it's the basic income discussion, whether it's any other form of way in which the state can provide services for people. I think now we are recognizing that it's so important to keep alive the spirit of initiative, the capacity to say no to what the administrators want you to do, and the capacity to create your own better solutions sometimes. It's not always that they know better, sometimes poor people know better, and sometimes they can benefit from entrepreneurial activities of themselves and their neighbors and the wider entrepreneurial community. And so these kind of debates should be at the heart of the debate. So the market liberals have sometimes been insufficiently tuned to some of the problems. I cannot really blame the Ordo liberals, because I think they have been, among the liberals, some of the best group to understand the importance of all these issues, which the socialists have also built up, the social democrats have built up in different ways. But some liberals sometimes tend to underplay the importance of, for example, justice and so on, which is a very important thing. But you shouldn't use a theory of justice to say you shouldn't blindly follow a system of saying we have all these inequalities and therefore we need to jump in and create this rigid state. This is not a logical step that we need to take. We can have social justice and we can still have a dynamic free society, which is not just market society, but markets are an important part of that.
Of course, so you have always these ideologies to both sides, and that's blocking the real interesting discussion. You have neoliberal, that's evil, or socialism, everybody has the same, that's also not. But the real world is in between and much more dynamic. So bureaucracy is a part of where the liberals are more or less against. So bureaucracy is important for many things, but this growing of bureaucracy which is blocking creativity, initiative, self-motivated, intrinsic motivated work and so on, and the creativity then of the bureaucrats is to block what is going on by other people. So they need to do something, but what they can do is hindering, blocking, destroying. And that's bad. It's not just the costs for bureaucracy, which is what is always mentioned. It is much more that those people living there doing those things are often doing things they don't really like, and they are not valuable. They don't have a real fruitful goal. And on the other hand, it is a burden for many others. So, and that is why we need not the welfare state in this scale that the welfare state is protecting everything and doing everything and leading everything, but we have social protection in the dynamic of economy, in the dynamic of initiatives, of doing things for each others. And as I said, economy is the social behavior of the people. So it's very interesting for me that it comes from that side. And then I'm looking to, for example, James Buchanan and Demogrant, and his analysis of public choice and equality, that everybody has to take the same burden and gets the same amount of, for example, the Demogrant. Can you say some word about those, in particular Buchanan?
Absolutely. And so we're talking about James Buchanan, the Virginia School political economist or economist who won the Nobel Prize as well for his contributions, who is most well known for his contributions to constitutional political economy and public choice theory, as you said, rightfully said. In fact, there's now much more interest in Buchanan also from the Ordo side. So if you talk to people from the Walter Eucken Institute, and in fact I was just visiting one of their exhibitions and they had a big picture of James Buchanan there as well, because they consider him as one of the most important sort of American allies of the Ordo school, precisely because, as I started this conversation, Walter Eucken already place so much emphasis on the constitutional dimension of politics. And Eucken and Buchanan agreed, if you get the constitutional structure right, which includes not just the written constitution, but also the basic social norms within which people interact, you get most of the politics right as well. Because then, if the foundational rules are rotten, you will get rotten fruit from whatever flows out of it. In this sense, James Buchanan also developed a model of redistribution and basic income, which he called the Democrat, like you say. And this is, I think, the best way to bridge the gap between the American liberalism and the German liberalism. Because if we accept that Buchanan is an honorary member of the Ordo school, as Hayek in different ways was as well, then I think we can see what kind of basic income model could flow out of the Freiburg, Eucken, Böhm tradition as well. So what is important here for Buchanan is that, well, first of all, the mere fact that he had a basic income model is almost not acknowledged in the current debate. And in fact, many discussions of Buchanan ignore the fact completely because it's very inconvenient and confusing that he even talked about this issue. Because he's become a darling of very conservative thinkers. And he was in many ways liberal conservative, as we would say, or libertarian conservative. But he was always adamant that the question is not, does the state provide lots of services or give lots of money to people? What matters is the way in which this is done. What matters are the rules in which this is done. So you can have a very slim, sort of athletic, sort of trimmed down state, or you can have a kind of a very well-fed, or some would say fat, state. Either way, if you have the constitutional structure right, as Eucken would say, as Buchanan would say, you can have a generous welfare state. And how is this possible? Well, Buchanan said, what you need to do is you need to have a system of general rules that are applicable to all. You need to have a system where, instead of having this constant special interest struggle between rent-seeking individuals and groups, what we talked about, the class interest politics, but also just a group of farmers here, this local government here, they want more fund money for themselves and they have to do it at the expense of others, which creates this, what Buchanan called warfare, political warfare. What you want to do is you want to minimize political warfare, even if we recognize that there will be differences of interest and these need to be recognized. Buchanan said that we need to focus on politics by principle, not interest, or politics by rules, not interest. And basic income, for him, what he called the Democrat, was one possible way in which you could have a welfare state which is run on principle and on general rules rather than on interest and on special administrative discretion. So his scheme was that you have a constitutional rule which people come together as free and equal citizens to enact, in which they agree to be bound by a system in which everybody faces the same tax obligation and everybody is entitled to the same benefit system. So in his scheme it would be a combination of, on the one hand, a flat tax, what he called, or proportional tax as it is sometimes called, and on the other hand the demo grant, which is really the same thing as universal basic income. It is on the one hand a flat percentage payment of all your income, which is the same for everybody, so there's minimal differences, or there's minimal exemptions and special privileges, as there is in today. If you go to one of the best paying jobs around the world is being a tax lawyer, because the tax system is so complicated. And in fact, there isn't as much money to be made, but the same thing is true on the benefit side. The benefit system is equally complicated, full of loopholes, full of exemptions, and this is precisely the problem that Buchanan wanted to avoid. Therefore, he saw basic income on the benefit side as being equally desirable, precisely because it avoids exemptions. It makes it harder for one particular group to say, we are especially privileged or especially deserving of this money, therefore we should get it and not you. And instead you have a system in which everybody is entitled to the same benefit, regardless of their background, their occupation, their age, their gender, their race, and you have a universal basic income scheme which is constitutionally protected. Now, Oiken never proposed anything like this, but it is precisely analogous to the structure of the order of the constitutional rules that Oiken talked about. And therefore, I believe Buchanan's demo grant is in the spirit of the early Ordo school, and also in some ways of the later Ordo school of Müller-Armack, for example, who talked about market-conforming social security. He happened to favor different types of social security, but I believe basic income is a worthy component, contender, I should say, and indeed might even be the best way to provide kind of Ordo-type basic income scheme for the century we live in and for the type of society we live in.
Isn't that interesting? Buchanan put at the top individual, the individual.
Yes.
Everything is for and from the individual. There's no institution, there's nothing, there's always individuals.
Yes.
On the one hand. And on the other hand, he's so strongly looking on equality. Yes. As a value.
Yes.
That's interesting, I guess, that he came to the point of the real value of individual being, that there are no institutions and all that, which is all illusion. It's always done by people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, that he got this understanding of equality. And that comes together.
Yes, and I think this is so important to realize, that what the best thinkers in the liberal tradition emphasized is what Herbert Spencer called the law of equal freedom. This is the foundation of the best thinkers of the liberal tradition, including Buchanan, including Adam Smith, which is the idea that equality is at the heart of the liberal enterprise. Equality meaning not the equality of outcome.
Absolutely not, no.
But the equality of each other in respect to each other.
Yeah, of being, the equality being. Of being.
Of really, it's a basic human right.
Absolutely, and that's human right is the acknowledgement, the discovering of humans as a being, and because of that same human rights coming from the human being, not putting from outside on.
Exactly, exactly. And so in this sense, I believe we could say that Buchanan's model is egalitarian as much as it is liberal or libertarian.
And then when we look to the third part of society, which is, if you want to say so, to do things for each other, or the sphere of social activity or love or economy, so brotherhood, sisterhood, where we are doing things for each other, we are acting with each other. Yes. This is not just the individual, not only the individual, the freedom. This is not just equality, which is linked to that we are human beings. This is interaction.
Yes.
Can we have a look from that proposal that there are three parts of society on this. So two are clear: individual, equality. And economy is somehow the activity in between.
Yes, and this is where everything really happens in that interaction.
Yes, yes.
So the interaction is really it's a kaleidoscope. You look into it and you see different shapes changing all the time.
Yeah.
It's a dynamic process. It's also what Buchanan in one of his later works called the creative process. Economy is the creative process.
Absolutely,
It is not just where people who already have existing values come, but it's also where they learn new values and where they
it is like
develop.
in university. Would Buchanan agree when I say enterprises are universities?
Yeah.
Because you learn. You are learning, right?
Yes.
It's your life, and life is learning. Life is doing things for others, making your things coming to real.
Exactly. And this is the side of the equation also for the Ordo. For Ordnungspolitik, yes, you could say they focus on these rigid rules, but the rigid rules are only there because everything that happens within those rules is not rigid.
Yeah.
It's the freedom that happens that is dynamic, it's unpredictable,
Right.
and it creates new forms.
You need a frame for being able to be initiative and creative. So,
Exactly.
and if you have just market rules by itself, then the market rules by themselves, destroying the market rules, they abolishing competition, they build monopolies, and they control everybody, because that's the goal. If you have a company, to control everybody, to have them tied to you as customers, and delete all your competitors. So you need framework, and you need the understanding that first we are a society, a civil society, then we are an economy, and we can make some frame rules that economy works at its best for all of us.
Yes.
Right? That's the order again. It's not first the economy, it is our understanding as human beings in social society and human society.
Yes.
And then we can see what is necessary for economy to work best.
Yes, exactly. The economy is the process that happens when people interact within certain rules. And really, it's a disservice to Ordo tradition or even the Chicago tradition or the Austrian tradition to say that they only are like put money before everything else or something like that. That is not true.
No.
I mean, some thinkers perhaps, but that is certainly not the general thing. They are very, very concerned about all these aspects of human interaction.
Yeah.
And also, perhaps I should say that there still remain very important open questions about this. If let's say for example, we have something like a basic income scheme, which is built on Buchanan principles or Ordo principles or Chicago school principles or even Hayekian principles, what then is what then are the rest of the rules in which we should live? And this is still where we have so much discussion to be had. How actively should we fight against monopolies? How actively should we do this and that?
Yeah. For Götz Werner, for example, it was important to establish the Götz Werner chair here in Freiburg, in particular because of ordoliberalism and his hope that basic income, unconditional basic income, could be linked to ordoliberalism and could fit to it and could be implemented in this idea for, let's call it a new ordoliberalism, however you call it, however you name it. But this was his hope, or somehow in one of the intentions. What would you say about that?
I think it's a very noble and important intention. I think since so little has been written on this connection, there's still a lot that needs to be discussed. I think that if we have a new ordoliberalism, it still needs to be ordoliberalism, and it still needs to be in touch with the tradition, and it needs to build up on Eucken, Böhm, Röpke, Müller-Amack. And so a lot of work needs to be done to say, okay, what did they say? Where did they go wrong? Where did they go right? And to really bring this. And in this, I think there's also room for lots of creative disagreements about, you know, do we need negative income tax? Do we need basic income? Do we need
consumption tax, where you
participation income, how the tax system should work, like, and all these things are, I think, still open in the end. This is what I hope for new ordoliberalism is, yes, developing of new basic income models, but also just revitalizing the conversation around what social security or what welfare state means in a world which is becoming more and more interconnected, more and more complex, and more and more rich and diverse. And this is what the new ordoliberalism should do, I think. And here we should focus on going back to the classics, but also bringing these global conversations together, bringing in the wisdom from the Virginia School of James Buchanan, from Chicago of Stiegler and Friedman, from Austria, from Hayek and others, and also from the social liberal tradition of John Rawls and everybody else, and Philip Van Parijs, and who've done marvelous work on that corner of liberalism, which is just as valuable in that big family of liberalism. And so I think somebody should, it's not one person, it's a whole community that needs to do this work, but I think it's a very valuable task.
Thank you very much, Otto, for this first meeting.
Thank you.
And I look forward to seeing you again for a next round.
Thank you.